All right, let's get right into it. We're about to unpack a story that is just full of these shocking contradictions. It's about a man who, by all accounts, built this impressive creative and financial world for himself, only to watch it all just completely dissolve in a matter of weeks. It's a story that really makes you question things about success, about hidden struggles, and about what happens when the very systems that are supposed to help you end up being the ones that tear everything down. So let's start at the top, at the peak. In 2022, Daniel Bates's documented income was $170,942. Just to put that into perspective for you, that's in the top 10% of individual earners in the entire country that year. This wasn't some fluke. This was the result of over a decade of hard work. He was, for all intents and purposes, a high-earning executive, the guy in charge. Now, look at this number, $630. This is what makes the whole story so unbelievable. Because less than 3 years after earning that huge salary, this is the monthly payment that would set off a chain reaction, a total collapse that would wipe out everything he had built. On the surface, it doesn't make any sense, right? And that, right there, is the big question we're tackling in this explainer. It's not just about what happened, it's why it happened. How does someone with that kind of proven success and structure end up completely broke over a figure that honestly should have been a minor issue for him? To figure that out, we have to look at these two massive forces that were at war within his life, the armor he built on the outside and the battles he was fighting on the inside. So first, let's talk about that armor, that foundation. Because when you look at the documents, the man's life looked rock solid. It completely shatters that stereotype of, the chaotic artist living day to day. The reality was the exact opposite. And this is what's so important to get. There's this massive gap between what you might think his life was like and what it actually was. You hear artist and might picture someone unstable, but the paper trail shows a decade of steady W-2 jobs. You might think he was transient, moving around. Nope, 6 straight years in the same apartment in Dallas. And he wasn't just a gig worker. We're talking serious roles, executive, supervisor. I mean, this timeline really shows you that history of just reliability. These aren't short stints. We're talking 9 years in one major role, 3 years in another, and look at how versatile he was. Everything from blue-collar work like a warehouse supervisor to a luxury suite attendant, all while his creative income was soaring into 6 figures. This is the resume of someone who is organized, dependable, and a total professional. And, on top of all that stable day job history, he was building this. V2VBDB was his holding company, the master brand for an indie record label and a film production company. He ran it all through this really complex system of personas. Each one had a job. DLB, the armor, was the professional public version of himself. Dante East, the escape, was his creative, more experimental side. And Daniel Bates, the ghost, was the quiet operator in the background, making sure the whole machine ran. This wasn't chaos at all. This was a deliberately, meticulously built empire. Okay, so we've established that the outside looked incredibly strong. Now let's go inside, because this is where we see the cracks forming. Beneath all that armor, the evidence shows this deep, long-running internal war. And that war is what made him so vulnerable when the system started to fail him. Now, this is a really important and, frankly, a very tough piece of the puzzle. This isn't just, some artistic expression of sadness. This is a hospital discharge summary from 2018. It's a medical document that lays out a long, difficult history with bipolar disorder and depression. It grounds that internal conflict he was feeling in a very stark, undeniable reality. This psychological assessment is really the key that unlocks this whole thing. It's fascinating. On one hand, his personality profile shows he was actually built for structure. He was detail-oriented, organized, the perfect reliable employee, that ghost we talked about. But here's the twist. He scored incredibly low on social and enterprising traits. So what does that mean? It means that the very act of managing people, which was his job, was just deeply exhausting for him. He didn't have that inner drive for the hustle, for the persuasion, for the constant push to dominate a market. He was building an empire that he was psychologically not wired to run, a reluctant emperor. And you can just feel that deep exhaustion in his own words. He wrote in his 4 a.m. thoughts that he sees the world he's forced to operate in not as people but as a beast, a heavy, dark, inhuman system, an empire made of wealth and image. So he wasn't just fighting himself, he was fighting this philosophical war against the very structure of the modern world. And this is what brings us to the actual collapse. Because that heavy, dark, inhuman system that he saw as a beast, well, it's exactly what ended up destroying him. In less than 2 months, a decade of stability was just systematically taken apart. The speed of this is it's breathtaking. First, he tries to do the responsible thing. He sees the debt coming, so he hires a law firm, pays them his last $4,000 to file for bankruptcy protection. But the filing gets kicked back because of a small payroll error from an old job, a tiny bureaucratic hiccup. The documents show him frantically emailing and calling his lawyers trying to get it fixed, but the responses are slow, they're unclear. The system just eats his money and gives him nothing. So with no legal protection, the eviction from the home he's lived in for 6 years goes through, all over that $630. And then the final cruel blow. Just 2 days later, an accidental fire rips through his apartment and destroys everything he owns. It was a complete and total system failure. And you have to understand, for him, this fight wasn't just about money. It was deeply spiritual. He actually explains that he holds on to his name, Daniel, because of its symbolic weight. He's thinking of the biblical Daniel in the lion's den, the man who stood inside this massive, powerful, inhuman empire and just refused to bow down. His real-life struggle was a mirror of that personal philosophy. But if you really want to understand who he is, you have to look at what he did when he had literally nothing left. This is where you see the real man, the one who was under all that armor, all those personas. This is where his true character comes out. His whole philosophy as an artist is wrapped up in this idea right here. He doesn't clean up his story. He doesn't try to hide the pain or make it pretty. And why? Because he sees his work as a map. And as he says, a map is pretty useless if it doesn't show you where the landmines are. He documents the struggle, raw and unfiltered, because he believes that's the only way to leave something real and valuable behind for others. And here's that philosophy in action, in the real world, in the absolute dead center of his own crisis, homeless, no money, sleeping in his car. His number one priority became his neighbor, Bruce Nutter. Bruce was a retired disabled man, also left homeless by the fire, with absolutely no one to help him. And Daniel, with what little he had left, paid for Bruce's motel room. He was the one fighting on the phone about double charges for Bruce's room, all while he himself had nowhere to go. And this is the resolution we found in the communications. A message saying that Bruce had finally found a permanent place to live. I mean, it's such a small victory in the middle of this huge personal disaster, but it's so powerful. It meant that Daniel could finally, even just for a moment, take a much-needed sigh of relief. It just shows you that even at his absolute lowest point, his focus was on caring for someone else. So it all leaves us with this final question. In a world full of these giant systems and empires, when everything we build falls apart, when all the armor gets stripped away, what is actually left? What really matters? This story seems to suggest that maybe the answer isn't in the empires we build for ourselves, but in those small, quiet acts of integrity and mercy that we show to other people, especially when we have absolutely nothing left to give.